Hello, everybody, and good morning. Welcome to a comprehensive guide to ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 and emergency shower and eye wash compliance. We're going to get going. Thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. We have a lot of great information in this webinar for you. Let's get into it. So very first thing, I have to give you the not for broad distribution message, but this presentation is not meant to be distributed widely, rather used for educational purposes only, which is what we're going to use it for here in just a second. Questions. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, we love questions, challenging questions, whatever you have. So please be sure to use the question section on the control panel, submit those. My partner is on the back end of the presentation, making sure things go smoothly, and he is going to add those onto the back end of the presentation. So when we get towards the end, we'll do a live Q&A, and I'll knock out as many as I possibly can, or as many as Hayden added and thought we had time for. The webinar is being recorded. So this will be on the Haas YouTube channel, but we will also send you a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours after the presentation to make sure you have the link to the webinar, as well as a bunch of follow-up materials to help make this, an even more useful communication for you, links and ANSI checklists and things of that sort. So also all of the questions that I couldn't answer, I will answer via a Excel spreadsheet, and we'll make sure that we give you all of the questions and answers afterwards. We're going to launch poll questions during the webinar. They're very quick, very easy to answer. We really appreciate your participation in those. And a follow-up survey will be sent out after the webinar, and your participation in that will get you a $5 Starbucks gift card too. So we'll make sure to buy you a cup of coffee for participation in that follow-up survey, as it helps us to continue to improve this, get feedback from you, and so on. My name is Justin Dunn. I am the Senior Field Marketing Specialist here at Haas. I've been here for about 8 years, talking about ANSI and ADA, public hydration and safety. With me, as I mentioned, behind the scenes, Hayden Delgado. He has a section towards the end that he is going to present, and he is running the webinar on the back end. Hayden, do you want to say hi real quick?
Hey, everybody. I will be running our different forms of questions going on throughout the webinar. And please address any questions that you have in the chat. I'll try to get to as many as I can during the webinar. If not, the answers will be included in that follow-up email.
Perfect, okay. And then, so today's topics, we're discussing the ANSI ISEA Z358.1, specifically the 2014 standard. That's the most recent. There's no grandfather clause in the ANSI standard, so whatever the most recent version of the standard is what we need to be adhering to. Significant requirements of the standard and how to test for those requirements. Best practices for emergency equipment, because we've been doing this for a really long time. We have a lot of great insight into how to best use the emergency equipment and some insights there. Resources for achieving compliance, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So we're going to kick it off with poll question number 1 and then get into it. Hayden, go ahead on that.
So our first poll question today is, which best describes your role in choosing showers and eye face washes? The options are place the order, install and or maintain product, specify product and plans, decide or make recommendations, and I do not have a role. For this question, you can only put one answer as well. We will have a few. You can select as many that apply to you. Continue to give everybody a few more seconds to get some answers in. right, thank you, everyone.
Excellent participation on that. Thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate it. So getting into it, now if you're attending an ANSI ISEA Z358.1 webinar, you probably know who OSHA is, but just for those who might not, OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They are the agency for responsible for regulating emergency shower and eye wash facilities. They have their own standard, and that standard is 29 CFR 1910.151C under the Medical Services and First Aid section, and that is the paragraph that they give us. And all it is stating is where you might be exposed, you need drenching equipment available. And what that doesn't tell us is what that equipment needs to look like, how it needs to function, where it needs to be installed, and all of that information, which is where the ANSI ISEA come in, okay? And the Z358.1 standard, that's how we know what to do, okay? Now, the primary intent behind that standard is reducing injuries and fatalities, right? That's always goal number one. We want to make sure that everybody gets home in the same way that they showed up for work. Lowering general workplace risk, and then lowering lost time and money for both the employee and for the employer, right? Both in litigation, in the amount of hours that you're out, in hospital bills, in that recovery time. The more that we can cut that, the faster you can get to emergency equipment, the better that emergency equipment functions and works, the more likely you are to get home to your family and in better shape. Now, OSHA has stepped up enforcement, particularly for employers who have a history of serious or repeated violations. Those are two of the most serious violations. You've either ignored OSHA or haven't taken action on something they told you to do, or they found out that you did it again. So those are some of the most serious and high amounts as far as their fines go. On August 1st, 2016, OSHA fines increased for the first time since 1990, and it was by a huge margin because they were not adjusting for inflation. Now, effective January 2nd, 2018, OSHA fines have increased by an additional 2% to account for inflation, and it's going to be a much more frequent adjustment to ensure that they're staying on top of the fines, it is being adjusted appropriately. That is going to bring us to interactive poll number 1, and then based on your answers there, we have some very interesting information for you.
Our first interactive poll question is, what do you think the average OSHA fine is? $0 to $1,000, $1,000 to $10,000, $11,000 to $25,000, or $26,000 to $100,000? The interactive poll questions today are a little bit different than our standard poll questions. After I close the poll, I'll reopen it and share what the answers are. It'll just give a basic percentage of how many people voted for each option. Great, I'm going to close this one up and then show the responses. So the top answer today for the average OSHA fine estimates was $11,000 to $25,000, followed by $1,000 to $10,000. Then a good percentage of you put $26,000 to $100,000, and then only 1% putting $1,000 or less.
So kind of all over the place, which is kind of where their fines are at. So this is a map of OSHA fines across the U.S. And some of the more serious and some of the low-end fines and penalties over the last handful of years. So this is all public information. This is out there. We like to share because we like people to have a realistic expectation of what OSHA is dealing out there. Many of these being serious or repeat violations. One that I like to point out here frequently is the Bay Area Athletic Club is in Coos Bay, Oregon. Back in July 2017, I looked into the violation. They had a pool, and their employees were dealing with pH chemicals, balancing the pool, and doing that type of work. They just didn't have an eyewash or shower station. It was probably a repeat violation based on that number, but nearly $200,000, which is, I mean, that's a tough amount for any company to swallow or just fork over. And then there's the elephant in the room is in the top right-hand corner over in New Jersey, almost a $400,000 penalty. So sticking with the ANSI ISEA standard, adhering closely to it, using it as a guide for compliance, and taking steps to ensure that you're meeting those compliance requirements as closely as possible will for sure help to avoid a lot of these issues, right? Now, the standard was written by the ISEA, that's the International Safety Equipment Association, distributed by ANSI, okay? Now, OSHA references the ANSI standard as the primary source for compliance with their own standard, the 1910.151C. So they reference the standard in their fines and as the primary document that you need to be looking at to comply with their own standard. It was first published in 1981 and has had many revisions since, the most recent being 2014. Some of the most important changes that happened in the last several revisions were in 2019, we got a temperature range for water delivery, which was really highly needed. Before that, it just had tepid water, and which is a lot of things to a lot of people. Simultaneous use requirements, eyewash testing requirements, and in 2014, a lot of changes that were geared more towards the manufacturing of emergency equipment. Haas luckily was way ahead of the game, so we were good to go, but it included design, manufacture, and installation, equipment installation location, and adjusted measurements on some of the requirements. So let's get into the significant requirements and how to test for those requirements. Number one, the first conversation we need to have is that weekly testing is required. Weekly testing and a once a year annual inspection. And I'll tell you what the differences are there. On a weekly basis, it's so simple. It's all you have to do, visit the equipment, activate the equipment, ensure that you have water at the heads of the device, right? And that it's on long enough to clear out the dead leg, okay? I have seen every flavor of water come out of an eyewash or safety shower because it was ignored for too long. I've seen, water that looked like Gatorade, rust coming out of it, one that was basically concentrated evil. It was like pitch black. So we need to make sure that we're clearing out the dead legs. On portable equipment, all that is required is that you visit the unit, open the tank, or and ensure that there's enough water in the tank. Or if it's a pressurized unit, ensure that it's properly pressurized via the gauge, and maybe give the tank a kick to make sure it's actually full of water. On an annual basis, you have to test the equipment from head to toe, okay? You need to measure the height of the pull rod, the shower outlet, the height of the water coming out of the eyewash, sign. Everything has to be tested, and you need to do a 15-minute inspection of the water and make sure that it's capable of delivering 15 minutes of water. Now that can be difficult to do. Sometimes it's best to evaluate a site's capabilities of performing a 15-minute wash, right? Testing a loop of water connected to several pieces of equipment and so on. But this is our safety checklist, super handy document, but again, on an annual basis, once all the way through, everything has to be tested. Now, some of the things you're gonna need are tape measure, eyewash gauge, 5-gallon bucket with the 2-gallon water line marked. I'll explain how to use that later. A shower sock and pole, because they call them drench showers for a reason. Thermometers to measure the temperature of the water, and then of course an ANSI checklist to ensure that we're hitting all the boxes and making sure it's completely getting tested. So for an example, that's the 9011 on the right there. That's an example of each of the tools that you're going to need to test a piece of equipment, a combination specifically, right? You're not going to need a shower sock for an eyewash only. Now for the significant requirements and how to test for those requirements. So number one, has to be accessible within 10 seconds or 55 feet, okay? I specifically use the 55-foot measurement because I think it's a lot easier to measure than it is 10 seconds. We are all built differently. We all move at different rates and speeds, especially in an emergency. I'm going to be panicking. I'm going to be sprinting towards the nearest eyewash or safety shower if I were exposed to something. So 10 seconds can be difficult to measure. 55 feet is a good, you know, a nice hard distance that we can measure. Okay, so just check for the proximity to the hazard. Measure it out if you need to, but make sure it's as close as possible. It needs to be located on the same level as the hazard. We can't have stairs or any change in level between the hazard and the emergency equipment, right? If you put yourself into the victim's shoes, you probably don't have very good use of your eyes at the moment and your vision. So navigating to the piece of equipment could be very difficult. So no change in level. You also want to make sure it's free of obstructions. The photos on the right are very real. These situations are out there. For whatever reason, the emergency equipment gets installed in the corner of the facility. People eventually stop testing it. They start piling garbage and equipment and stuff around it. And now the victim has to dig through whatever that obstacle is to get to the emergency equipment. This could look like a toolbox, cleaning devices or chemicals, and so on. So we need to make sure they don't have a obstacle course to get through to get to the emergency equipment. The area needs to be well lit and easily identifiable with highly visible signage. If you recognize the shower and the eyewash in that photo on the right, like immediately, that's really cool. But I want you to imagine a situation where you're maybe working outdoors, you've just been exposed to something, you have this giant green wall and nothing making this equipment highly visible from a distance as you're trying to approach it and find it, and making sure that this is as easy to find as possible is really important. Okay, now it has to deliver flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes. That's where that 15-minute test comes into. Again, maybe test the capabilities of a loop of water connected to several devices to supply 15 minutes, or just activate the equipment for 15 minutes. If it's outdoors or there's a drain nearby, it's a lot easier. Otherwise, you're going to need a way to capture the water and move it. Outlets need to be protected from airborne contaminants. We have to make sure the dust covers are in place. Okay, so ensure all of the heads of the devices and the stored flushing fluid, if it's a portable, self-contained type piece of equipment, are completely covered and it's not accumulating dirt or other contaminants in the tank. The dust cover, whatever it looks like, because all manufacturers make them a little bit different. That's ours right there, plastic flip top. So once the water's activated, it pops that right off. These all look differently, but it must be self-removing. Okay, that dust cover, whatever it looks like, once activated, has to remove itself. You cannot have plastic bags covering the unit and so on. We see a lot of DIY dust covers out there, and they're usually a bad idea. Try to use the manufacturer's design and make sure that it comes off immediately after activation. You can't take a separate action to remove. So we've got one of my coworkers down here. He's in the equipment demonstrating excellent technique for using the piece of emergency equipment. That equipment has to go from off to on in 1 second or less, okay? And it has to remain on without the use of the operator's hands. You've got other things to deal with, okay? Removing clothing that's contaminated, opening your eyes, and so on, okay? So it has to be completely hands-free, and it has to be activated in under 1 second. Now, there is a misconception out there that it's one motion. That is untrue. According to the ANSI standard, it has to be activated in under 1 second, which can require maybe multiple actions to activate, as long as it can be done in under 1 second. Eyewashes. So these are minimum flow requirements for each type of equipment. And there are 3 primary types out there. You have your eyewashes, okay? The flow for this has to deliver 0.4 gallons per minute, and that's because you're only delivering 2 streams of water, and that's it. Now an eye face wash has a lot more water. It's covering your forehead, your cheeks, your eyes. It's a face wash. So you want to make sure, so the minimum amount of water for that is 3 gallons per minute, okay? A drench shower is 20 gallons per minute, and these are all bare minimums, okay? It can go way above that, but then we risk, you know, the more water we're using, the more that we are going to risk damaging the victim, especially if you're dealing with corrosives, caustic chemicals, substances, and stuff like that. You're already damaging the outer layer and of your body, your skin, and dumping 20 gallons on top of it is still going to be, I mean, it's necessary for first aid reasons to get all that stuff off of you. Even with the best equipment, that's not going to feel great. But then you start dumping 30, 40 gallons on top of them, and it's going to be absolutely horrific. So trying to dial that back using flow controls, newer technology, and things like that is really important. Obviously, if you have a combination unit, say a shower and eye face wash, you're going to need a minimum of 23 gallons per minute, okay? Now, the unit has to also provide a controlled flow of flushing fluid at a velocity that's low enough to be non-injurious to the user. So exactly what I just mentioned, if you're using a high excess of water, it can make this experience much more difficult for the victim, okay? So ensuring that it is controlled, that we're using, you know, modern technology at the end points, exit points of the water. We're using the water intelligently. As you can see, Axion technology in particular in this video, it's spreading the water out nice and evenly. It's not like a waterfall of water on top of you. And he's got a nice eye face wash stream. I have some examples coming up of non-controlled, and it's exactly what we want to avoid here on the left. So this is too much water. There's no flow controls dialing this back. It is an excess of water, and there's no way that you're going to be able to keep your face in this, let alone your eyeballs, okay? We want a gentle stream of water. Now, unfortunately, if there's not enough water, like you see on the right, or there's clogs in the piping, you have that old bullhorn style eye wash, the water could just favor one path over the other. So you get uneven flow rates, low flow rates, and things like that. And now you're deciding which eye is your favorite, okay? And we want to try to avoid that. So we have to meet the minimum amounts, the GPM requirements. Check the manufacturer's instructions for PSI, GPM, and make sure you're setting these up correctly and testing for these shortcomings. Now, the way that we're testing this, and we want to make sure that it's usable anthropometrically, right, based on average human measurements of the body, this was designed and given to us directly from the ANSI standard. This is an eye wash gauge design, and that's exactly what us and many of our competitors designed our eye wash gauges based on, to ensure that the flushing fluid is covering the areas between the interior and exterior of a gauge at some point under 8 inches. Okay, so we use that gauge, we measure 8 inches, we slowly lower the gauge, and so long as the eye washes are meeting those eye circles and covering the area between the lines, it is fully usable. Okay, it's going to meet average human eye spacing, and it's going to be fully usable with the amount of water that's coming out of the head. Here's a nice above view. You can see measuring, gauge in place, lowering it, and you can see the eye wash is perfectly meeting the eye circles on the gauge. This is super important. That's exactly what we're looking for. It can be at any point under 8 inches. Now, the reason for that, we don't want it aligning above 8 inches, is because we don't want this balancing act, right? You're going to be bent over, probably grabbing the bowl, balancing yourself for about 15 minutes. Okay, that time can go longer based on the SDS, the safety data sheets. They'll tell you how long you need to be in the equipment, but we don't want to make it difficult to use. So having it meet your eyes somewhere immediately above the head of the device is super important. Now the flow pattern for the water has to be between the top of the flow pattern, I should say, of the water, not of the head of the device, of the water, has to be between 33 and 53 inches for this same reason. Okay, we want to make sure the taller amongst us, the shorter amongst us can all balance, bend over, and utilize the water coming out of the heads of the device at a reasonable height. Okay, it's not going to be built so that it's too tall for some users or too short for other users. Okay, there is also a minimum distance for the heads of the device from any obstruction, okay, which is 6 inches. And they just want to make sure that the flow pattern is not going to be obstructed, and 2, you're not going to hit your head on anything when you go to use the device. Okay. So just use a tape measure, measure the distance, measure from the surface floor of the user up to the top of the flow pattern, and you'll know whether you're in compliance or not. Super easy on these ones. Now for the shower, we do something similar to what a nurse would do in the hospital. Okay, they're not measuring your pulse for a full 60 seconds and then telling you what your heart rate is at. They take, 10 seconds, so on, and then they just do the math in their head. Okay, and that's kind of what we're doing here with the 5-gallon bucket with the 2-gallon water line marked. So what you're going to need is that bucket, the shower sock and pole, the thermometer. Make sure you hold on, just like the gentleman in the picture here, because there's going to be potentially a lot of pressure coming out of that shower, and you don't want to surprise baptism. Okay, that water will drench you immediately, and we want to make sure we're capturing it all for an accurate test. So place the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket so we can get a temperature reading later on. Place the shower sock around the shower head and funnel it down into the bucket, or you're going to have some wet loafers. Activate the Eyewash or the eye face wash if one is present. We want to make sure if it's a combination unit, then it is functioning correctly when it's being used as a combination unit, because that's its purpose. Activate the shower for 6 seconds. Okay, and that's where that math comes in. Okay, we're checking that the 2-gallon water line on the bucket is being met after that 6 seconds, and we just do the math, right? 6 seconds, 2 gallons times 10, 60 seconds, 20 gallons. Okay, easy peasy. Now the shower flow pattern is something we also have to measure. Okay, now you can see on the right we have a very narrow flow pattern. On the left we have a compliant flow pattern, and the way that we're achieving the measurement of this is by measuring 60 inches up above the floor wherever the user is going to be standing and 20 inches across. Again, that's just based on average human anthropometrics, our average shoulder spacing as a human species, and making sure that that flow pattern is going to completely cover our bodies. The flow pattern also has to be free of obstructions by 16 inches within that flow pattern. So we need to measure from the center of the flow pattern out 16 inches to make sure we're not going to be obstructed when we're standing underneath the flow pattern. Here's another one of my coworkers. He's got his tape measure. He's measured 60 inches above the floor, 20 inches across. The test can be difficult in an indoor setting, right? We can't just let the shower fly if we have sensitive equipment, drywall, etc. nearby. It's gonna make a mess. So try to test this the way that it's intended to be tested, which is with a tape measure and the flow pattern running. But if you have a shower head that is undamaged, you are more than meeting the correct GPM flow rates. In some places, you're going to have to just assume, right? There are some places where we cannot just let the shower fly. So do your absolute best. Try to accomplish this method of testing. Is most important. Now the shower head has to be 82 to 96 inches from the floor. Again, just use a tape measure to the outlet of the water. If it's too low, it's going to be too narrow. If it's too high, it's going to be too wide, and it's not going to rinse our bodies appropriately. The pull rod, also use a tape measure. It cannot exceed a maximum height of 69 inches. And that is, again, to make sure that shorter people can use it, taller people can use it, and everybody in between. It's not going to be too high to reach. Just measure to the very bottom of the pull rod, and we can ensure that it does not exceed 69 inches from the floor. Combination units and their components have to be capable of operating simultaneously. Okay, so when you're testing these devices, like I said earlier, if you have an Eyewash or face wash installed, when you're activating the shower, activate both at the same time. Simultaneous flow issues are some of the sneakiest, most dangerous flow issues that you can find on combination units, because a lot of people are only turning on and off the Eyewash or face wash, and without the shower running, we're not discovering any simultaneous flow issues. So what happens is on older equipment that's still, I mean, widespread in the industry, that is not using flow controls like modern equipment, like our Axion equipment that you see there in the photo, for instance. It's not dialing back the pressure at the shower, and the water will take the path of least resistance through the equipment. And if there's nothing dialing back the pressure at the shower, there's nothing feeding the Eyewash or face wash. So the shower will starve the Eyewash or face wash. With both of them activated, you'll see a dip in pressure to the Eyewash or the face wash, whatever's installed there. And now you need to decide, do I need the shower more? Do I need the Eyewash more? I need both of them at the same time, but they're not working at the same time. So make sure when you're testing, you're activating both. They also have to be positioned so that they can be used at the same time. Oftentimes these get installed so the shower is facing one way, the Eyewash is facing the other, and that is not how they're designed to be used. So it's for one user, and they need to be aligned so the user can use both at the same time. Shutoff valves, incredibly important. If you have a supply line that is within reach of employees, etc., you have to lock it open. Okay, and that's to make sure we don't have any unauthorized shutoff at the shutoff valve. Many valves already have a locking device built into them, so you can just throw a lock right on. I like to suggest lotto devices so that there's a procedure for replacing the device after somebody's done maintaining or doing work on the line. Okay, because there are times when you're going to need to shut it off, right, for maintenance and things like that. But if it is reachable, got to lock it open. We run into tons of situations where they are randomly closed. We go to activate the equipment, there's no water to the devices, and which is just prolonging the amount of time that you're being exposed to the hazardous substance. So trace the supply lines back as far as you can and ensure that if they're reachable easily, especially to employees, you're getting them locked open. Now, employees who may be exposed to hazardous materials need to be instructed in the location and the proper use of that emergency equipment, okay? Which should be a no-brainer for most people. If you're doing something dangerous and the likelihood that you're going to require an Eyewash, safety shower, so on, it's best that you know where the equipment is, you know exactly how it works, to limit the amount of time from exposure to first aid. Okay. Also, make sure that the sign that you have installed is the correct type of sign. Okay. You don't want to advertise like a combination unit where there's only an Eyewash, or only an Eyewash where there's only a drench hose and things like that. So make sure your signage is correct too. And maybe quiz your employees on the location of the emergency equipment and how to activate it. Now, where the possibility of freezing conditions exist, you need to have freeze protected equipment. Totally makes sense, right? Check your local weather patterns. Make sure that you are testing during seasons where freezing is most likely. Okay. Now, freeze protected equipment usually looks something like what you see on the screen here. It's jacketed. It has heat trace cables freeze protection valves that will dump freezing water until it's compliant again, and so on. So having a device like this in place where you have the possibility of freezing is required. Obviously, if the pipes freeze, the water's not going to come out and we're going to have a serious issue. Now, the equipment also has to deliver tepid flushing fluid. And that flushing fluid, as I mentioned before, it used to just say tepid flushing fluid. It didn't give us a temperature range, which is so important because some of us are going to act super tough. You know, we're going to get, you know, high 40s, low 50 degree water coming out of there and being like, this is fine. You know, even my home shower is about 105, 108 in the morning, but I would never put my eyes directly in that that temperature of water. This temperature range is specifically designed for our bodies and for a 15-minute flush. At about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you have about an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes longer, based on how you're built, to where you're going to get hypothermic. And on the high end, 100 degrees Fahrenheit is where the soft tissue of our eyes begin to take damage. So this is a very specific temperature range. Anywhere in between here is compliant. 16 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius for my friends up north. 75% of ophthalmologists say that having tempered water is very important and that it increases the chance that the victim can tolerate a 15-minute flush, right? You're gonna be in there for 15 minutes. The outer layer of your body, your insulation for your body may already be damaged, right? Especially if we're dealing, again, with corrosives, caustics, anything that is going to damage your skin actively and quickly, and you're going to lose heat very quickly. So ensuring that it's within this temperature range and we're not risking things like hyperthermia or hypothermia is very important. Now, test the water temperature. This can be done a bunch of different ways. I mentioned throwing the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket. If you have a shower, it's a great way to test it. You can use a probe, laser, whatever your method is for measuring the water temperature. If it's an eye wash or eye face wash, just measure the water directly in the bowl and so on. But we need that temperature range. If it's too cold, again, you're risking hypothermia, cold shock, possibly leading to cardiac arrest, especially if your body is in really bad condition. And we need to make sure we get all of those chemicals off of you as quickly as possible. And cold water, if it's too cold, may prevent that, especially if it's a thicker substance, you know, that's oily and so on. So making sure that the temperature is high enough that it's not going to congeal or whatever the substance that's on you is important as well. You also may not remove your clothing, and you got to be in your birthday suit. So if it's too cold, they may not remove their clothing. Too hot, and you're risking hyperthermia, which is the opposite of hypothermia. Your body's going to get too hot too quickly and may result in heat stroke, confusion. You could scald your eyes and soft tissue of your eyes at 100 degrees, skin burns at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit and above, okay, after about 5 minutes. And it may have a negative reaction with the chemicals that you were exposed to as well if it's too hot. Legionella, unfortunately, has a small overlap with the ANSI standard. So Legionella bacteria thrives between 95 degrees and 115 degrees. So, and obviously the top end of our temperature range is at 100 degrees. So we suggest going even lower and hitting 95 degrees or below to 60 degrees being a temperature range. That's what we suggest. You definitely don't want Legionella bacteria in your pipes. And one of the main ways that you can do that is by not testing your equipment and not clearing out your dead leg. So make sure you have the right temperature, make sure you're testing. These are very real examples at the bottom. Some of these pulled from my absolute favorite place, which is for a safety nerd, which is Reddit OSHA. I love going in there and you can find the craziest stuff, but these are very real examples. Supplemental equipment, squeeze bottles, incredibly important, but they have to be maintained. All right, they have their own section in the ANSI standard, but they are called supplemental equipment for a reason. Okay, you can only have these when supplementing primary plumbed equipment nearby, right? Squeeze bottles cannot provide 15 minutes of flushing fluid. It's not possible, right? You have this little handheld device. You're lucky if you maybe get a minute out of them, okay? But they are designed to be used immediately upon exposure to something, so you can use it on your way to primary plumbed equipment to get proper first aid, okay? You need to be checking the expiration dates on them. You need to be making sure that the employees aren't messing with them on a regular basis. You know, the spoon and knife is probably the worst example there. At that point, I think you've just given up. Might as well just pop the eye out. But these are supplemental. They're meant for immediate emergency use and not for sustained first aid. Okay. There is two appendices to the ANSI standard. Appendix A1 through A4 has some safety considerations for personal wash units, some first aid practices, waste disposal, and personal protective equipment. One of the most important ones in there is waste disposal. You need to carefully consider local requirements, because whatever you're washing off of you may not want that going to the city water supply, right? So we need to be careful if we have situations like that, that we are controlling where that water goes. B1 through B7 has safety considerations for the supply lines and sizing. Generally speaking, for a combination unit, 1.25 inch sizing for the pipe is the bare minimum to make sure that you're getting enough water to the combination unit. For an Eyewash or face wash, pretty much a 1/2 inch line. Water capacity, valve operation, alarm devices. Consider an alarm if you haven't before. They're incredibly important. They help to notify your coworkers, safety office, anybody nearby that you are having an emergency. And the faster we can get somebody on the phone with 911, getting you first responders to the scene is incredibly important. So if you haven't considered alarms before, please consider them going forward. The placement of the emergency equipment, the flushing fluid temperature range, and then more considerations for weekly activation of plumbed emergency equipment. One of the most important, or two of the most important, I should say, first is the installation considerations for a booth, okay? These are designed to capture the water. Some of them for more extreme environments in an outdoor setting. These can't be manufactured to be flush with the ground. Earlier, I told you can't have any change in level, but this consideration gives us a single step up into an enclosure. So we're allowed one single step as long as it is an enclosed booth type device. You can also have doors, but they have to meet certain requirements. Number one, non-locking. Okay, you can't have a locking door. The doors have to open in the direction of the emergency equipment. They don't want you stopping to pull a door open. The hazard has to be non-corrosive. The second it's corrosive, you cannot have doors in the way, and you need emergency equipment as immediately available as possible. And you have to make sure they're push bar or panic bar activated. So long as you've met all of these requirements, you can have a door between the hazard and the emergency equipment. That brings us to poll question number 2. Hayden, if you would, please.
Our second poll question is, what are you likely to do after today's webinar? Check all that apply for this one. As there isn't an answer that relates to you, there's no need to put one. The options are: do a full test using the ANSI checklist HAWS provides, contact HAWS for more info on ANSI, educate others, order product to become compliant, and specify the right type of equipment. I just want to say thank you to everybody that is participating in our poll questions. They really help us gear information that we discuss to the audience, so we appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and close this one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. Okay, so a couple best practices real quick. Number one, remove your contacts. That should totally make sense to everybody. Don't rub your eyes. Don't try to unintentionally spread that contagion. And contaminants can get trapped between your contacts and your eyes, so pop those out right away. Disrobe completely, including socks and shoes. The contaminants are running down your body. They're trapped in your clothing. You got to be removing that clothing as quickly as possible, and make sure to take off your socks and shoes. They'll get trapped in your shoes and do a lot of damage to your feet during an emergency, so make sure you're paying attention to that. Provide privacy curtains. That should make sense to everybody too. I mean, if you've been exposed to something, you're already having maybe one of the worst days of your life, depending on what it is that you've been contaminated with, and having some privacy during your first aid emergency in front of your coworkers is probably a really great idea. They can be retrofitted real easy. Do a bump test. Do a real quick test of the emergency equipment in the area. If you're doing something particularly dangerous in an area that you're unfamiliar with, right? Go test the emergency equipment, make sure it's working correctly, and then do whatever you were gonna do. Be cautious while assisting not to contaminate yourself or others, okay? Yell and scream at your coworkers directions on where to go, etc., but do not touch them. Ensure the correct type of signage at the unit. It happens all the time, so it's worth mentioning again. Just make sure you have the correct type at the unit, so the advertised equipment at the endpoint there is exactly what was advertised on the sign. Be cautious of proximity to electrical hazards. I don't even want to get into how often I find outlets and electrical panels and things like that nearby to drenched showers and eye face washes. It's crazy. Do not do that. That should be in your local building code. Locate other first aid equipment nearby, right? If you have first aid stations and so on, locate them near the emergency equipment so it's all in one place. And then clean your equipment regularly. This is really important, making sure the heads of the device are clear. You can get buildup over time. Clean out the strainers that are built into the emergency equipment, and so on. On that note, some of you might be familiar with this particular clip. I wanted to touch on proper use of emergency equipment real quick. And believe it or not, The Office, while this is a really funny scene and it's a good looking piece of emergency equipment, his technique is ideal. What you want to do is, especially if it's a contaminant with just your eyes, use your fingers, grab your eyelids, and do not hold back. Open them as wide as possible and stick your eyes into the eye wash or eye face wash, okay? You want to thoroughly rinse out your eyes, and as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible, and making sure that your lids are wide open, spread, and you can fully clean out the area is incredibly important, okay? And during this process, ideally on your way to the emergency equipment, if you need the shower, removing your clothing and so on the second you get there, okay? This is Z358.1. This is color coding for emergency hazards and for safety locations. So green is ANSI Z535.1-2017 compliant for the location of safety equipment, okay? It is also the color of a particular emergency equipment supplier whose webinar you might be attending right now. So we believe it's important to meet all ANSI standards and make sure that we're providing above and beyond. So try to color code your equipment and hazards correctly. Make sure that using the right equipment for the hazard and eye wash for airborne particulates, dust, eye face washes for minor incidents only affecting the eyes and face, low corrosive type stuff that's not going to affect your skin overall, but may affect you the areas around your eyes, in your nose, and so on. A drenched shower is really PPE decontamination. It's better known as a decontamination shower, okay? And then last, the combination unit is the king, chemical exposure of the eyes, face, and body's full body decontamination, all right? And that brings us to interactive poll number 2. Hayden, if you would, please.
How much of your emergency equipment meets the ANSI ISEA Z358.1 2014 standard? You can only select one option for this one again. The options are 75% plus, 50 to 74%, 25 to 49%, 1 to 24%, and 0%.
I always love everybody's confidence here. And what Hayden is about to talk about, because he's going to take over here, is a program that I run personally here at Haas. And I think the results may shock you.
What was this one at? So here are the responses. As you can see, over 50% of people state that they believe their emergency equipment is, 75% of it is standard or meets this standard, followed by 50 to 74, and then it pretty much goes in order all the way down to just 5% thinking 0% is compliant. After seeing what the majority of you think your ANSI compliant level is, I'm now going to touch on 2 of our programs that we offer to help your situation. I think you would be surprised at how low your percentage realistically is. And the first program that we offer is our ANSI Emergency Shower and Eyewash Survey program. We have representatives for this program across the US and Canada. They are qualified and trained in the ANSI standard, as well as how to test for the ANSI standard and its requirements. This survey program is going to offer you insight into your own facility's compliance by offering a free full-day inspection, which includes an inspection report. That's just a basic download of every piece of emergency equipment that would test your facility and how it ranks up. Then there's the executive summary chart. That's the chart here off to the right of the slide, showing the breakdown of compliant versus non-compliant. And then a debriefing meeting where we'll sit down with you, discuss our findings and the best recommendations for fixes with you. There are some restrictions that apply to this, mainly dealing with distance to your facility or how many days we realistically need to be on site. And you can visit our website using the link at the bottom of this slide to get in contact directly with Justin and myself, fill out our survey form, and then we can have a discussion with you on how best to move forward.
We have trained professionals throughout the US and Canada, trained by yours truly. So the restrictions we're talking about are mostly just based on that. So we're spread out really well to provide this to you, but sometimes it's, if it's way out in the sticks, it may be quite a bit of time before we can get out there.
Our third poll question today is, would you be interested in a free site survey for your existing emergency equipment for ANSI compliance? Still have a good amount of responses coming in for this one, so I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds. Thank you. So when it comes to the ANSI standard, we often find that the issue is not knowing how to test for the ANSI standard, which often leads to fines for non-compliance or injury of an employee, among many other things. Haas Services is a program that we have set up to help you achieve ANSI compliance in any environment and remove those potential pain points that you may have. Most of the time, it's pain points that you're not even aware that you have. And I would like to point out that we do provide this service regardless of what brand you have installed your facility currently. And Haas Services is really just a great way for us to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the market. We're the only manufacturer that provides a warranty field service for emergency shower and eyewash products like this. And at the bottom of the slide, you see exactly what's included with this. It's that insurance to your equipment will be tested weekly and annually, preventative maintenance and contracts, repairs and upgrades, startup and commissioning, online competent person training, and training and certification, as well as a warranty service. Knowledge service is really just a great way for us to ensure that we're complementing those superior products we provide you with the best possible service we can provide you with.
Not to mention taking all that maintenance responsibility off of your maintenance staff and putting it on our staff and in the hands of ANSI professionals, which is awesome.
The final poll question today is, would you be interested in learning more about how HOD services can help you achieve ANSI compliance?
And then right after this series of poll questions, or after this poll question, I'm going to launch right into the questions and answers. Hayden's been throwing them on the back end here. So I'm going to hop right into those, get as many done as I can, and then we'll close.
All right, Justin, here we go.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for participating in those. We really do appreciate it. So let's get into what you guys have on your mind. So we've had questions submitted throughout the webinar. We also had some that were pre-submitted leading up to the webinar. So I'm going to answer some of those as well. So it looks like, oh, and anytime you see a slash there, it's because Hayden determined that the question was pretty much the same exact question. So we wanted to address both people and their questions. So for James and Lindsay, are Eyewash stations required to be connected to a drain system? And they are not. There's nothing in the ANSI standard in Z358.1 or in any similar ANSI standard that requires a drain at emergency equipment. Okay, you'll definitely want to look at your local building code, and it's obviously a good idea. Having a drain right next to something that's going to dump 360 gallons of water in your facility during an emergency would be ideal. Okay, so it's not required from an OSHA ANSI standpoint, but may be required based on your local building code. So that's where you're going to want to look, and just as a common sense type of thing, you definitely want to drain nearby this type of equipment. John, be sure to address any Cal OSHA requirements. So Cal OSHA is one weird example when it comes to ANSI and the Z358.1-2014 standard, because in usual fashion, California is coming up with new codes and regulations, and oftentimes we are adapting those to the rest of the country, and they're going above and beyond. In this instance, they are a little bit behind on the ANSI requirements. They're referencing in some places an older version of the ANSI standard. There is no grandfather clause in the ANSI requirements, but Cal OSHA specifically will reference an older version of the standard. Testing is still required. Most of the requirements are still absolutely required and the same, but there are some differences. And we've been urging Cal OSHA to catch up for some time now, and I'm sure they will. Socorro, how to meet standard in extreme cold and desert environment. There are lots of ways to do this, lots of different types of equipment and solutions to keeping the equipment cool or warming the equipment up, okay? Including installing the equipment as immediately on the outside wall of your facility, so you can have the valves, mixing valves, etc., inside your facility, insulating your supply lines, burying your supply lines. So there's freeze-resistant equipment out there that works on bury valves. We have equipment exactly like that. An 8300 FP would be ours, and the water is stored below the freeze line, so that when you activate the paddles on the equipment, it is bringing water up from underground into the equipment. You can also use heat traced equipment. It requires power, of course, and water. but they will prevent freezing down to -40 and with some equipment -30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so those are a great way to do that. If it's a hot environment, we have shelters that you can drop in place as well. So lots of different solutions there, usually a combination of those solutions to make sure you're meeting the standard in those environments. Daniel and Pamela, is shower testing required weekly? If the Eyewash units are completed weekly, can the showers be tested on a monthly basis? The monthly basis requirement is an old one, and with the ANSI standard and its enforcement through OSHA, testing is done on a weekly basis. Okay, so every week, hopefully I explained how absolutely simple it is. On, off, clear out the dead leg real quick, and that's it. That's all you have to do on a weekly basis. It's super simple. Check the box, sign a test tag, and move on. But it is a weekly basis, not on a monthly basis. Carl asked if labeling and what labeling and sticker requirements are. In Arizona, stickers get dried out and peel away from the valve. Oh, for sure they do. Yeah, our signs and so on. Our signs are designed to be, you know, to withstand outdoor UV, etc. Areas. But stickers and stuff, there's no labeling requirements. The most important and highly identifiable piece of labeling on the equipment is the sign. That's the one we want to focus on. If the stickers on the equipment are peeling off and so on, that's really not a big issue. We can always send you replacements, as other manufacturers can too, if it's real important for you. They of course make the equipment even more highly visible, but having a sign in place that's as highly visible as possible is the main focus. Okay. We even have 3-sided signs and so on. This last one, this one right here, so this was anonymous, it looks like. OSHA specifically addressed the need for eyewash stations within certain time and distance from corrosives. Do eyewash stations available in areas without corrosives need to meet the same standards at those in areas with corrosives? The only difference would be like a door. You cannot have doors where you have a corrosive substance, right? But all of the requirements remain exactly the same, right? 55 feet, their function of the equipment, water delivery, and no obstructions and so on, okay? The only other thing that can change, and it's based on the safety data sheet under the first aid section, which is what tells you, I need an eyewash, I need a safety shower. It'll say if your eyes were exposed, you need this. If your skin was exposed, you need this. The time may change from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, etc., depending on the substance. But typically it's 15 minutes, but everything else stays the same. Sonia, recommendations for weekly shower testing. For capture and disposal, 9011 test kit. Our test kit is awesome. It's easy to store away, easy to use. It comes with all the tools that you need. But otherwise, trash can, 5-gallon bucket, the shower sock being most important. It's a lot of water and you got to control it into the bucket to do a real test. But making sure that you don't make a mess too. The shower sock is super useful, but just something to capture the water with. Maybe a smaller bucket if you have a eye wash or eye face wash drain at the bottom of like a pedestal or something like that. But our 9011 test kit is really actually pretty nice. I would consider looking into that. Judy, typically high school science labs don't have drains for emergency showers. That's true. If there are drains, they are not confined, and 15 minutes of flowing water would flood the classroom. Totally true, 360 gallons. It's going somewhere. It is enough to have teachers activate the emergency equipment for a few seconds monthly by collecting water into a rolling trash can. So it still has to be done weekly. The trash can idea is a great idea. There aren't typically drains, so definitely having some sort of bucket, trash can, etc. in place to do that is really important. But you have to activate them on a weekly basis. There is an exception in the in the ANSI standard for schools, but it's around valves. It is the only situation, as long as it's approved by the safety team for the school, that you are allowed to have self-closing valves. And that's because kids are turds and they could activate the equipment and leave or not use it, appropriately. And they have an exception for a self-closing valve for schools. Otherwise, everywhere else has to have stay open valves. Michael, what is considered an obstacle? Anything. Hoses, garbage cans, anything in the path between the hazard and the emergency equipment is considered an obstacle. And then last, Kevin, what is the best option for outdoor protection, specifically in Denver, Colorado? 8317 CTFP, 7501T. So several slides back, you saw the freeze protected equipment that was on the screen. Those would be ideal. You have obviously freezing conditions in Denver, Colorado. You get crazy amounts of snow. I would suggest a shelter. Our shelter is awesome. It's built in place hut that the emergency equipment can fit inside of, and then make sure that's freeze protected. Hopefully that's a good enough answer, Kevin, but you can always reach out to us. And that's it. Contact us, reach out to us. I'm Justin Dunn, Senior Field Marketing Specialist. That's my information right there. Don't feel shy about using that. Haas Customer Service is an even better resource. We have a top-notch customer service team here at Haas. That is their phone number, toll-free number, email. Reach out to them with any question. We also have a live chat on www.haasco.com, and they are happy to answer any questions that you might have about the product, standards, or how to interact with our company. So please utilize that. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was useful. I hope you enjoyed this. We love doing this, Hayden and I specifically. This is one of our favorite things to do. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and thank you very much for attending.